Seeing none, I'm going to give the floor to the Assistant Vice President for Penn State with regards to the auxiliary and business services to give his presentation.
Good. Good evening, everybody. I can share my screen so I can pull I have one slide. Can I pull it up or is it okay? All right. Let me see, make sure. Can you see my slide?
Yes, sir, I can.
Yes.
You see the presentation slide or the speaker's notes?
Just the presentation.
Perfect. Okay, it worked. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is John Papazoglou. I'm the Associate VP for Auxiliary and Business Services for Penn State, and I'm here to review the 2022-23 graduate apartment rates. We presented this to the Finance, Business, and Capital Planning Committee earlier this afternoon, and we'll be presenting this at the September board meeting as well. For those of you that don't know, single graduate students and families are accommodated through leases at the 141 apartments reserved for graduate students at the White Course Complex at University Park. We separate the approval from these rates from undergraduate room and board rates, which we usually present to the board in February. And this past year, we did that in April due to delays with COVID. But we do that to better serve our graduate students. By approving these rates in September, graduate students will have more accurate information to help them with their decision making for the following year and allow us to offer leases at the appropriate time in the local market for these students. For 2022-23, there is no proposed increase in the graduate student apartment rates. The rates would remain the same as the current fiscal year. And last year, the rates were held flat due to the pandemic and the high degree of uncertainty about local market apartment rates. The rates that you see here are inclusive of utilities, laundry, cable TV, and wireless internet. One notable change, however, is that we are removing the free parking permit, which housing then has to pay to parking services. If a student needs a permit, they will now need to purchase one directly from transportation services. We're decoupling parking from rent because when the West Campus eventually opens, students in White Course will be less likely to need a permit, and our free transportation services covers that West area very well. And we don't include parking in any of our other housing rates. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Are there any questions for John? Katie?
Good evening, and thank you for coming to speak with us. I was curious in regard to the cost of the apartments. What kind of metrics were looked at to determine the cost? I certainly appreciate the cost being stable, but for a one-bedroom apartment, just based on my own research, even taking into consideration internet and electricity, this seems a bit more expensive than the going rate at other apartment complexes around town.
Well, it's hard for us to compare to off-campus housing. We have a we do have a different operating cost structure. Obviously, we have employees and benefits, and they're university employees that do this, that provide the service, and our cost of infrastructure to be on campus housing. You know, when we look at traditionally, when we do look at increases in rents, whether it's undergraduate or graduate, we take into account things like increases in utility costs, but mostly labor costs. They're our biggest cost. They're the largest cost we have. Last year, we didn't have a general salary increase for our employees. This year, we were budgeting at 2%. Obviously, with the rate of inflation that you're seeing in the local market, we expect that actually that will be somewhat higher as we hire replacement workers. And we do have a significantly higher benefit cost than the rest of the community population. So, I mean, those go in. So if you try to compare apples to apples and say, well, why is an apartment downtown or a hotel downtown or other services that we provide, a lot of that may be tied up in basically I would say it's the living wage and benefits that we pay to our employees.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps a lot.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks, Katie. Travis?
Hi there. Thanks for the presentation. I was curious, you said from the outset that there were 141 rooms set aside for graduate students. What percent of the total amount would that be for the total units? And if so, or after that as a follow-up, is there any discussion on expanding how many rooms may be available? Because this is a good opportunity for graduate students, but at 141, I feel like probably gets wiped up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know what percentage of the total West Campus housing that represents. Cheryl's on the phone, maybe Diane or Cheryl actually know what percentage that represents. I wish I knew actually. So
related to all of our inventory, is that the question?
No, I think if you look at Whitehorse, because of its location, and what percentage is graduate students versus other living types in that area?
So there are some undergraduates that live in that area, and that occupancy, and I'm looking at my numbers here for that. Hold on one second.
John, I can jump in really quickly.
Is 225 for undergraduates that live in that area as well. So it's a little, it's almost equal, because again, when you're looking at spaces, you also have families in some of those apartments for graduate students as well.
And we also have undergrads in some of our family apartments. So if you look at single grads, it's about 1/3 of our occupancy of the single grad space. And then typically our families are grads, but there are some undergrads in our family apartments on leases as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Travis. Matt?
Yeah, hey, thanks for the presentation. I just have 2 quick questions about the parking portion that you mentioned. Do you know how much those parking passes are going to be for the year for people that do live there? And then also, do you know if there's going to be like a competition to get those passes? Are they going to be pretty readily available for the people that want them, or are they going to be available to?
Yeah, they're available. Yeah, they'll be available. The allocation is for anybody that's living in West Campus, and the price, it's interesting enough when you look on the website there, the price that was listed for for Whitehorse before is $162 a semester, and typically the only permits that we sold were additional permits for family members if somebody needed a second permit. So we're holding that rate at that 162, which is actually the lowest cost parking permit aside from Beaver Stadium commuter. That is because normally it's what Rob's on the phone with, $320 a semester. So we feel it's fair compromise. Correct. It was really about extricating it from it as the West Campus begins to become more of a nexus for folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Niladri?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. So I had 2 questions. One being, so what kind of demand are you seeing for the Whitehorse apartments from grad students? Are all your apartments full? Are you seeing a lot of applications which you're having to reject? One, and second is, you mentioned about the cost breakup. So I just wanted to know, is there any specific cost on being on campus other than, so say for example, if this was in university housing in Blue Course Drive or something?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. And so, when Whitehorse was first built, it was probably one of the furthest points from the core campus. So we're seeing that dynamic change, and we expected that the demand for that part of campus will only increase as those academic buildings go up, because it's obviously changing where people are going on campus. I think actually the reason why parking was included in the rent was to make it more attractive, because it was a harder sell because of its distance from the center of campus. And now we see that changing. As far as your second question is being on campus as far as expenses, one of the differences that's specific to family housing that we have there is the university's nonprofit. We actually do pay an imputed tax. It's called an impact fee, because this is the one instance where we actually have people living on our campus that actually are using more of the borough's resources. For example, they're sending the kids to school and things like that. So for us internally, it is actually the one area where we're paying more of a tax, where we don't pay that for the undergraduate living. So there is that. But mainly I'd say I'd really call it our living wage, because even any work that we do on campus is done at the, even when we do repairs, everything that even if we use a contractor, we have to use the
prevailing wages.
Yeah, prevailing wages to do all the work on campus. And we do that well. I mean, we do that proudly. There's no issue with doing that, but we do realize that by doing those things, we're probably doing that at a higher cost than a third party or, living off campus. I can't really speak to any of the new things. Now, the demand profile is changing, because you may have noticed there's an incredible amount of off-campus apartments going up, and we're all curious to see what that's going to look like in the State College area over the next few years, and how that demand will shift, because there's some very expensive Class A type of living close by campus, but we're kind of curious to see what's that going to do to other housing down in that College Avenue area they're building another student apartment not too far from West Campus. So.
Hey, can I ask a quick follow-up to that? So I know, and I think you mentioned this earlier, but what resources do we have that says that parking won't be a concern once the West buildings are up and we have more traffic flow from that side?
So from a parking resources, we just completed and we just opened the West parking deck, which is 1,600 parking spaces. And that was done deliberately, as other spaces on the core of campus also get shifted away from the core. Like, for example, behind the Buki building, that parking lot, there's actually an academic building going in that spot as well. So as far as ample parking on that side of campus, it's more than ample. Actually, I think it was built vertically in order to accommodate future demand. More importantly is the parking program actually sustains all of our other internal transit. So when we think about transit, ideally, it's not about driving around campus. It's about the mobility around campus, which includes the shuttles and the CATA program and our regular shuttles, even the e-assist bikes that have been rolled out on campus. It actually supports those things as well, encouraging people to take just more efficient ways of transiting campus beyond walking and beyond driving.
Thank you for the answer.
John, if I could add to that, right now we have about 330 parking spaces surrounding White Course apartments, and typically we only have about 220 to 250 permits in circulation. And as we go to permit sales, as we do across the other residential areas, those folks that are in the adjacent housing have first pick of those. So the academic buildings actually don't impact those. We don't typically sell, and I should say typically sell, like faculty and staff permits into that lot. It's a residential lot, and that's the expectation, is that those folks living in White Course have first pick of those spots.
Thanks, Rob. Our last question will go to Claire.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I just had a quick question. Do you know what the % of people living in White Course that are grad students are either first year or international?
Actually,
So you mean in terms of undergrad Claire, right? Or
No, first year grad.
First grad students.
So graduate students, I would have to reach out to our housing assignments office to find out that breakdown. So you're looking for first year graduate students and international students. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I can look into that because again, we don't necessarily track that, you know, in our regular report. So we would run a report for that. Okay.
Claire, the one comment I would make on that is our single grads in this, you know, that don't have families, it is typically first years and international that choose to live in those spaces. And because that's how they find future housing, if that makes sense. They meet people and then they move off after that first year. And then for our family housing, a pretty significant percentage of that is international students who have come here with their families. So I don't know the exact percentage, but it is a significant percentage. But I just, the experience we have with, you know, the design of the current White course is that they want to meet people they know rather than living with people they don't know. So then they find something off campus after their first year, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, John, Rob, Cheryl, Diane, David, and your entire team for coming to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.